Alright, YouTube, it's a case of there you go again, a la Reagan for the legacy media at the moment. They are trying to claim, including some like former pro-Trump enclaves on the underground media, oh, he's backpedaling on the Affordable Care Act. He's going back on his promise. And so I decided, well, for such an important issue, especially for one of his 3 or 4 most major campaign pledges, I figured I'd take a look at what he was actually suggesting, and lo and behold, the media is completely wrong. What he is suggesting is what I've suggested, which is essentially destroy 99.9% of the Affordable Care Act, retain pre-existing conditions, and expanded coverage for young adults under parental plans. Those are the only good parts about the ACA. Everything else was, here's a regulation, here's a barrier to getting interstate competition, and here's some more monopolization, and here, fuck you, you're going to pay us this fee and that fee, and if you're too poor to afford any of the plans because we don't have interstate competition, we're going to even make you pay more for no coverage. All that crap is going to go by the wayside. That's essentially his pledge. Nobody, though, including the vast majority of even the most far-right Republicans in this country, people who probably think that Trump is a communist, never cared about pre-existing conditions being covered. Nobody ever opposed that. Nobody in either party had a problem with that. The point that a lot of us made when the ACA was born is that you could have gotten that, the part of the ACA that worked and made sense. You could have had a one-page piece of paper to create that specific bill. You didn't need the ACA to do it. What I think Trump's going to do is make a far more simplistic plan to replace the ACA, because it's already law. You would simply create a new bill that scores that out, gets rid of it, and rewrites it in its entirety under its same title, essentially. And what it would be, probably, is an encouragement of interstate competition, the allowance for states to participate in some sort of exchange system, but with companies able to, number one, no fine, if you don't have coverage, because it's retarded, it's ridiculous. Number two, allowing interstate competition. States would not be able to access them if they intend to monopolize it in state, like my state does, which is actually better than some of the states are faring, oddly enough, because our premiums haven't skyrocketed like some of them. They're still climbing up, but they haven't, shot up 200% like in some of these places in the country. But it doesn't work as well as if you just have competition in general. Force the states, various insurance companies to compete with one another, and they will lower costs to do so. Because that means that some company that's well set up in a low-tax state is going to outcompete some, tyrannical piece of crap company from a blue state or from an urban enclave. And then you will get an evening of the cost across the board for care, at least for the basics of care. Nobody had a problem with pre-existing conditions. Anybody pretending, oh yeah, I was gung-ho for Trump, but now he's backpedaling on the ACA, no, he's not. So you're either, again, you're being lied to by the legacy media, or you're not actually in support of him anyway. You're just trying to exact the ire of his actual fans by putting out propaganda. It is memetics. It is propaganda. Let's keep that in mind. But no, he's not backpedaling. Because if the ACA loses 99.9% of its entire bulk and goes from thousands of pages down to a 3 or 4 page long bill, it's no longer the ACA. They can use the same general term for it. They can assume that the very skeletal structure of the original ACA is somehow still intact, but it's not the same material, because only 2 of the provisions have been spoken of by Trump as being things he's interested in retaining. And even if he retained more than that, probably people wouldn't end up caring. The real thing that people care about is the ACA, the way it's designed, does not allow competition, which drives costs up. It is essentially mandatory, forcing people who in most cases are poor to actually pay a fine to the government for not being able to afford crappy government health care plans. It is the most ridiculous, convoluted piece of crap law that was passed in the most opaque fashion that could possibly have been made. That's why the ACA has remained, even among many Democrats, extremely unpopular. There has not been a day since the ACA was instituted where it was approved of by the majority of the U.S. population. Not for a single day has that been the case. It has always been disapproved of. Generally speaking, when they poll the public on their approval or disapproval of the law, it's something like 55-45. It's almost past being a partisan issue, and it includes virtually all independent people in this country who don't really affiliate with a party in disdain, generally speaking, for this law. It doesn't hurt the rich. They don't care because they've already had access to the plans that they want. They don't have to worry. It doesn't hurt the exceptionally poor. Many of them, because of the pre-existing conditions clause in there, actually gained coverage. But they could have gained coverage anyway if that had been the only bill. Meanwhile, the lower middle class, the working class, and the middle and upper middle class really are bearing the burden of this law. They're the ones that in many cases, because of lack of competition, even if they're in the upper middle class, cannot afford any of these plans. If they get anything, it's bare bones and overpriced. And it's more expensive and less effective than what they're used to having. You know, it's screwing around with employers. The ACA is dead, make no mistake. It's just a matter of whether Trump is capable of retaining those provisions that make sense. I think he can, in all honesty, because nobody's against them. Why don't you ask, go to some hillbilly trailer park or something where everyone's got Confederate flags in the air. They're still going to say that we should retain pre-existing conditions. Nobody cares about it. As far as extended coverage under parents, yeah, if you explain what that means to people, they're not going to oppose it because it wouldn't make sense to oppose it. Who the fuck cares? So yeah, the idea that he's retaining two provisions out of several thousand pages of material means that he's backpedaling on one of his campaign pledges is completely and totally wrong. The thing is, if Trump simply lays waste to the ACA, says, okay, it's done the second I take office, I'm going to ram through the repeal of this law, then all of those people that are now covered because of pre-existing conditions under a provision he actually likes get kicked off until he crafts a new law. But Trump doesn't want to do that. What he wants to do is simply replace the ACA lock, stock, and barrel with a new bill, something far more streamlined that simply contains a few provisions like that and guarantees interstate competition, which is probably the best thing to do. It is better than simply blasting the ACA and then waiting some time while people's insurance lapses, where they might not be able to get their medicine, where they might not be able to get treatment for the things they need to get treatment for. It would be inhumane to take these people off of insurance that they have gained, even though you intend to reinstate the provision that is allowing them to access the insurance market. Millions of people would suffer adverse consequences. It wouldn't be right. The outrage would be enormous. The Republicans need to keep this in mind, despite the fact that the GOP has just won a fairly historic election. They've actually gained ground in state houses, gained ground in governorships that they hold. They maintained the Senate, and now they have the presidency. Even though it is a historical win against an extremely crappy Democratic candidate, if you overstretch, if you do everything in your power to simply wreak havoc on every provision that the right has specifically stood against without regard to what independent voters especially think about those things, you will fail. During the midterms, you will get crushed. Trump will become a lame duck. He will probably lose re-election if he runs. That's not what he wants, nor is that what any sensible individual who knows anything about campaigning or about statesmanship would want. He has to be a little bit more gentle than that, making sure that these people with pre-existing conditions remain covered while he can craft legislation through the House and the Senate and then sign it that retains that but replaces basically the rest of the entire ACA with nothingness except for more competition is the best way to go. It's not a backpedaling, it is the abolition of a bill that doesn't work in favor of a new one under, again, the same basic tenets, the same basic concept of reforming healthcare. A new reform upon a reform that actually works. It's a good idea. If it were backpedaling, if he came out tomorrow and said, oh, I'm just going to leave the ACA as is, I'd call him out on that. I'd say, well, people were wrong perhaps to vote for you because that's one of the more important things you're talking about. I may not regret it because I saw the alternative as nuclear war, but at the same time I wouldn't be happy because then people would still be paying fines. Insurance rates would still be skyrocketing. Thankfully, he's not going to leave it as is. It's going to be largely destroyed and replaced by something that works. Not a backpedal. Not a flip-flop. Not what CNN and MSNBC are talking about right now. Oh, he's breaking his campaign pledge already. That's not what he's doing. He's doing exactly what he said. He said it would either be repealed and replaced, which is what he is now suggesting doing, or simply reformed in some manner. He is talking about repealing and replacing it. He's simply not talking about letting people's insurance lapse so they keel over and die in the streets. I would think that that would be something that people on the left could at least mildly respect, because that was the big one. Pre-existing conditions was the golden savior of the ACA among liberal groups. It's the only reason they continued to approve of it. Everything else about the ACA they largely hated, other than pre-existing conditions, because it made sense. That's about all. Peace out.